I think a lot of the material on this channel has been heavy on Ukraine lately. And while it's a tragic situation there, I do have to also focus on problems that are happening here in the U.S. I happen to live in Ohio, and of course, in our state and in many other states, there are elections coming up this year for statewide offices, and of course, Congress and legislatures. So we're entering a very pivotal time, and my sense is that many people are going to be interested in these elections is it under the illusion that it's an antidote to all of the problems that we're having. I don't believe that. I think, unfortunately, whether the Republicans have a major red wave, as some people are predicting in the fall, or the Democrats hold on to any of their current power in the House and Senate, I think, unfortunately, the economy is in a very fragile state. And I don't have the like a lot of hope to deliver to you. I can tell you that there is a channel out there called Rethinking the Dollar that you might want to check out that offers a lot of emergency times pointers on what to do in terms of, a few investment strategies. They talk to real investment strategists. But today we are going to focus on the political realm because there are important things that happen there. We have a Supreme Court nominee who is up for confirmation with the Senate Judiciary Committee. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, I think her name is. And we also have a number of races as well. And we have Clarence Thomas is in the hospital with flu-like symptoms. There was even an update today that the Supreme Court is not giving any update about whether Justice Thomas is in the hospital anymore. So certainly I don't want to take anything for granted. We have a country, a world that where freedom is basically being encroached on every single day. And I don't want to, have you give up hope, but I also want you to be aware that a lot of the decisions that are going to most impact your life and the life of the family around you are already being made without your consent, and there might be nothing you can do about it except prepare the best for the worst. Where do we start? So there is this SCOTUS decision that was handed down today. I'm not sure exactly how the split went because if Thomas was gone, then I'm not sure who exactly voted, but there was a two-person dissent where a number of state districts were tossed out in Wisconsin. And this is an interesting paradox because often we're told that the Republican Party is the one that engages in gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is a sort of strategy game that has been played especially in nations like ours where there's first past the post voting, meaning that members of the legislature are elected by district zone. And gerrymandering just means that you draw the maps a certain way such that they favor one party or the other. And the Republicans have always been accused of gerrymandering. Now, there, of course, were some egregious cases among Republicans. There is in Ohio, we have something called the Snake on the Lake District, which extends all the way from Toledo, which is in northwestern Ohio, to I believe it's Lakewood, which is a suburb of Cleveland. And it's just this long, winding, thin district. And it is something that you have to admit, yeah, the Republicans came up with that in order to maximize their partisan advantage. Now, there are states like New York where the maps have always been gerrymandered to serve the Democrats. If you look at some districts, you have just massive blobs of upstate New York packed together, different metro areas that don't have much to do with one another, and they're in the same congressional district. Meanwhile, you have maximization of the different urban areas of Long Island and New York in order to benefit the heavily Democratic electorate there. In Wisconsin, apparently the governor had a proposed map that was accepted by the state Supreme Court, and yet it was taken to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they said that striking down the state districts and sending the case back to the Supreme Court gave all sides enough time to put new maps in place by Wisconsin's August 9th primary election. So, the U.S. Supreme Court said that the state court failed to consider whether an alternative map may exist that would keep the number of majority black districts at 6 without infringing on the equal political opportunity of the black voters who would have made up the new 7th district. Evers' office has indicated that although its analysis showed the maps would lead to some gains for state Democrats, Republicans would still likely maintain their majority in the state assembly and Senate, where they currently hold majorities of 61 to 38 and 21 to 12, respectively, according to the AP. Republicans hold 5 of the 8 seats in Wisconsin. Of the 8 seats Wisconsin has in Congress, and the new map likely would have made at least one currently held by a Republican more competitive. What I've noticed is that in states where Republicans are in control, they often have less power to draw the maps. My state, Ohio, has had several maps rejected by the Ohio Supreme Court for being too, and I'm not exactly sure what the problem is, but generally the mantra is that they keep too many minority voters in the same districts, and therefore they're unfair. The reality is that according to the law in Ohio, there is a number of other clauses that they have to fulfill. One of them is that they can't divide a single municipality, and therefore it's very hard because there are a number of cities in Ohio that are very densely populated by minorities. You can't just draw the maps in order to make them fair in terms of distributing the minority population without splitting up a municipality, because otherwise you're basically playing with blocks. You're not playing with individual voters. You're not even playing with individual neighborhoods and communities. You're playing with large blocks of voters that are in specific cities. So that is a battle that's been going on. I know somebody here that is running for office, and he's said that because of the delays and because of the rejected maps, they are going to have to delay the primary election day here in Ohio for the state legislature and a lot of the other statewide, or sorry, a lot of the other state district dependent positions that typically happens in May. So that's what's happening at the Supreme Court level. But it's not the only thing that's happening. This is a clip that's been going wild this entire day. So this is from Tampa Bay 10. It's a CBS affiliate down there.
The right of a transgender woman to compete in women's sports. Do you think Congress, the people ought to get to decide that through Congress, or the judge can just find it as an unenumerated right, a penumbra of the Constitution?
Well, Senator, that the topic that you raised is something that is, as you say, a hot topic today, and could certainly be litigated. So I'm not in a position to say more about whether or not it's actually one of the unenumerated rights.
Well, I don't want to ask you how you'd rule, but would you have any problem saying, okay, if that case that is litigated, saying this is a political question? Whoa, stop! I'm staying in my lane. Congress needs to decide this case. The people need to decide that through their elected representatives.
Well,
would that be appropriate?
Well, respectfully, Senator, that is a decision. In other words, you say, I'm not asking you to decide it, but in every case, the determination about whether or not something is a political question or whether or not the court has or has not jurisdiction is an issue for judges, and so I'm not able to speak to it.
Okay.
All right, so remember that clip. Remember the way she answers that. And then let's listen to what happened when she was asked a more simple question.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman?
Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No,
Yeah,
I can't.
you can.
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the meaning
biologist.
of the
So, understandably, you could say, well, I don't want to rule on something that is not, I don't want to give you any hint of how I would rule on something before I actually sat on the court. That's something that she said to John Kennedy in the first clip over here. In the second clip that I showed you, she responded to Marsha Blackburn that she can't give a definition of the word woman. So they're two very different responses, but they indicate sort of a level of insecurity that this Supreme Court candidate has that I think is going to, it really presents a threat to our, our nation's legal system, that we even have somebody who is in this position. The other issue that has come up with her is that she has this favorability towards lower sentences for people who had sexual crimes against children, specifically child content, child sexual content. This is something that you see Media Matters is trying to deflect. You see even Reason Magazine is trying to say that this is an unfair, it's an unfair area of attack. The truth of the matter is that she actually did say that sentences are too harsh and that there is some sort of actually let me find a video, okay? So
and I'll confess, Judge Jackson, as I listened to your testimony, I believe you are someone who is compassionate. I believe you care for children, obviously your children and other children. But I also see a record of activism and advocacy as it concerns sexual predators that stems back decades and that is concerning. You wrote your note on the Harvard Law Review on sex crimes. Your note is your major academic work on the Law Review, and yours is entitled Prevention versus Punishment Towards a Principled Distinction in the Restraint of
So this isn't the clip that I was thinking of, but it is an interesting one.
Released sex offenders. And in it, you argue, and I quote, a recent spate of legislation purports to regulate released sex offenders by requiring them to register with local law enforcement officials, notify community members of their presence, undergo DNA testing, and submit to civil commitment for an indefinite term. Although many courts and commentators herald these laws as valid regulatory measures, others reject them as punitive enactments that violate the rights of individuals who have already been sanctioned for their crimes. Under existing doctrine, the constitutionality of sex offender statutes depends upon their characterization as essentially preventative rather than punitive. And what you go on to explain is if they're viewed as punitive, they are unconstitutional. If they're viewed as preventative, they are not. And throughout the course of your note, you argue they should be viewed as punitive and therefore unconstitutional. Indeed, in the second to last page, you go through each of those four categories. You say requirements that sex offenders register may or may not be unconstitutional, depending upon whether, quote, in which sex offenders have no privacy right in registration information or blood samples. So you suggest that may or may not be constitutional, although you raise doubts about it. And then you raise very significant doubts about community notification, and you heavily suggest that civil commitment for sexual predators is unconstitutional. Do you still agree with the sentiments you expressed in your law school note?
Respectfully, Senator, those are not the sentiments that I expressed in my law school note. My law school note was about sex offender registration laws, which at the time were relatively new. As you know from our time in law school, one of the things that law school students do is they look for new developments in the law and they try to analyze them. That's something that makes for good fodder for a law school note. My note, which came out in 1996, was shortly after there were new Megan's laws. And the point that I was making was not that the laws were bad, that the laws were wrong. I was trying to assess something that is sort of fundamental in terms of the characterization of the laws. I didn't say that they were unconstitutional one way or the other. What I was trying to assess was how they are characterized. Some courts would look at those laws and call them preventative, and that has a certain set of consequences. Some courts would call them punitive, and that has a certain set of consequences. And what I was trying to do is figure out how to make the determination whether they were punitive or preventative.
Well, your note argued that they were punitive, and I would note that view, there have been some on the bench that have advocated that. The Supreme Court in 1997 decided a case called Kansas versus Hendricks, in which it upheld Kansas's civil commitment statute. That was a 5-4 vote. This has been a question that has been close at the Supreme Court. And I would note beyond that in terms of the prevalence of these statutes, all 50 states and D.C. have registry requirements. 47 states have community notification requirements. All 50 states have DNA or blood banks for sex offenders requirements. And 20 of the states, the federal government in D.C., have laws that allow for the indefinite detention of sex offenders. I would note in the state of Texas, a state court of appeals, relying on very much the same sort of reasoning you advocated in your note, struck down Texas's sexually violent predator civil commitment law. At the time I was the Solicitor General of Texas, I personally argued that appeal in the Texas Supreme Court. And the Texas Supreme Court unanimously reversed the Court of Appeals and upheld our statute. And if the views you advocated in law school prevailed, civil commitment laws across the country would be struck down, releasing sexual predators. And under the argument, community notification and DNA bank laws could well be struck down as well. Is that an outcome that should concern people?
Senator, my note wasn't advocating for the striking down of those laws. My note was trying to identify criteria that I thought could be applied consistently to determine whether the laws were punitive or preventative.
But with respect
Either
to Jackson, you argued that they were punitive, and you further say in the note, if they're punitive, they're unconstitutional.
I was looking.
So, without reading the document itself, this is a very major area where you can see that Ketanji Brown Jackson might be dodging an element of her past that I think most Americans would find problematic. Okay, the issue here, if you are struggling to understand, because a little bit of it is convoluted and they're going back and forth over exactly what she's trying to do, but she essentially wrote a legal opinion in law school where she was arguing that a number of measures, legal measures taken against sexual predators, are unconstitutional because they are punitive in nature. Okay, that's the way that Ted Cruz is characterizing it from the text of the article, and Ketanji Brown Jackson is trying to parry that attack by saying that no, this is just me trying to identify areas where we have to define whether something is punitive or preventative. Now, notice that if the article itself renders an opinion that it's punitive, and then therefore if it's punitive, it would be unconstitutional, then her position in the law, in the legal opinion, which is from law school, would be that that sexual predator registration laws, as well as DNA blood bank registration for sexual predators, and civil commitment, which I'm not precisely sure what it means. So if you're in the comments, please let me know exactly what that means for sexual predators. She believes that all of those would be unconstitutional, according to that opinion. Now, some people would say, well, as she has, that as law students, that's really their job. Their job is to identify new laws that are coming out and various issues that could come up insofar as their constitutionality is adjudicated in the courts. And the fact of the matter is that saying that it was just a legal opinion from law school isn't necessarily an excuse. You've seen in the past justices and judges for federal court be questioned about their legal opinions from law school and their conduct in law school and their legal opinions outside of the court, and some of their statements outside of the court and some of their affiliations outside of the court. People often try. I remember this happened very recently with an FCC commissioner nominee from President Biden. I think her name is Sanja Sohn or something. And she tried to say that my opinion was as a private citizen and advocate, and my opinion now is, and that's not going to affect my opinion as a servant on the FCC. And the danger of believing that is when you are spending so much of your life being a tireless advocate on behalf of an issue, on behalf of a stance on an issue, and then you get an appointment for an indefinite period of time, in this case, a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court, that would affect the issue that you're advocating on behalf of. People have to take at face value the statements that you've made in the past. Yes, there are cases like in law school where it is an academic exercise. It's also something that is relevant to the whole profession at large, right? Writing legal opinions and all of that. Something that I'm sure is not it's not the easiest thing to do. Ketanji Brown Jackson, I think if she is placed on the Supreme Court, will end up bringing a lot of shame to the court. And unfortunately, people are trying to make this into an issue of her identity, her race and gender. Look, I think she's a very intelligent woman. I think she's probably capable of expressing some very high level arguments. And unfortunately, I think those arguments are dangerous to having a society where children can be protected from people who mean to molest or do worse to them. I'll have you know that I've met people who are survivors of sexual assault, and I've met some that have told me that their assailant never really got their really a penalty. They got a slap on the wrist, or that the crime was covered up. There are people that I'm aware of in the area here that have been accused of sex crimes that those crimes were covered up. Unfortunately, I think the legal system is too easy on those people. I think the community is too easy on those people. I think that often the victims don't actually follow through and stand up, or they don't preserve the evidence, which is really a different issue. But the last thing that America needs to do, the last thing that the legal system needs to do, is concede more ground to sexual predators in order to allow them to get away with more of their crimes. Now, I listened earlier today. This is an issue that is, I think, important to a lot of people, given the last few years, given the Me Too movement, given the Jeffrey Epstein saga, and Ghislaine Maxwell, and Harvey Weinstein, and Matt Lauer, and all these other people. This is an issue I think that's worth spending time on, even at the expense of making this video too long. We cannot allow people who have committed sex crimes against children to and have been convicted of it. Okay, I'm not talking about people who there's some sort of controversy and we don't know if they're guilty or not guilty, and there's disputed evidence and everything's up for appeal. I'm talking about people who were convicted or confessed or pleaded guilty, and they're ready to sentence, and you're having or they've been through the system already, and they're coming out for release. We cannot allow for America's children and also other vulnerable people, right? There's all sorts of vulnerable people that are victims of sexual assault, to be victimized again simply because some people believe that certain of these measures are punitive. That is in and of itself the definition of being a preventative measure, right? She's saying that a sex offender registry would be punitive, when in fact, knowing that there is a sexual predator in the neighborhood, knowing that this person, what his habits are, or her habits, knowing what they may have done in the past, it empowers the neighbors in their surroundings to keep an eye on that person being a threat to their own child, to their own daughter, to their own, their own relatives, whoever that may be, right? It is something that is unpleasant. Unfortunately, a person like that may be open to retaliation from other members of the community. That's not really something that I think can be prevented. Look, withholding the publication of those names and allowing somebody like that to go free without their neighbors knowing about it, I think opens the door for a lot of very serious potential for recidivism. And she herself, she cited during a different part of these hearings the high recidivism statistics for some of these crimes. So I firmly believe that Ketanji Brown Jackson is unfit for the bench. She's unfit for the bench because of her stance on this, which is a sophisticated stance. It's something that, in her mind it makes sense, and she can draw out the logical conclusion for it. And that's why I don't think that this is an issue of her intelligence or of her competence or anything. I think she's competent mentally. I think she's unfit from an ethical standpoint. Alan Dershowitz was earlier making some sort of point that these senators who were making a big to-do about this, like Lindsey Graham, they were being absurd because obviously even sexual predators and people accused of sex crimes deserve a defense counsel, competent defense, and he's defended child pornographers and things like that. Dershowitz has, which shouldn't surprise you, but he made a huge, like, Dershowitz was being sarcastic about it. It's like, of course he did, and whatever. I think it was funny, but Dershowitz raises an important point I myself in the past, I was, I actually chatted online with somebody who said that he was a lawyer who had defended child pornographers that he knew were guilty and that he got them acquitted. And at the time, I said, "Oh, you must be some terrible scumbag. Imagine if that was your own kids that was on film." Well, the fact of the matter is that, as painful as it is to say, that guy, who I think is one of the most loathsome people I've ever encountered, was correct. Even people who are accused of terrible crimes and are guilty of terrible crimes are entitled to legal defense, and as competent of a legal defense as can be provided. Moving on. So it's because of her sophisticated but ethically problematic opinion here, one that basically tries to twist the definitions of preventative and punitive measures, that she is a dangerous person to put on the bench. And because of her refusal to define the word woman, because she says that she's not a biologist, that shows that this is a person who is too dishonest to put on the bench. And I'm not saying this because I think I'm somebody to pass moral judgment, right? But I'm not being put on the Supreme Court, and I never probably will ever be in that position. But she is, and I think Americans ought to take a special look at somebody who holds these types of opinions and uses this type of logic in order to justify withholding information from parents about child sexual predators in their neighborhood. Another thing is, so this is a little bit of a niche issue for me. She's been applauded by Everytown for gun safety. Now, they are, of course, one of the more well-funded groups that is in support of limiting the Second Amendment. And it said President Biden is governed as the strongest gun safety president in history. And we have every confidence that Judge Jackson will employ a mainstream common sense reading of the Second Amendment, said John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety. We applaud President Biden for nominating the first black woman to the Supreme Court and urge the Senate to answer the call of history and confirm her without delay. President Biden not only made history nominating the first black woman to the Supreme Court, but he's also nominated someone who we're confident will determine that common sense gun safety laws are constitutional, said Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action. That's the other major pro gun control group in the country. Our grassroots army of volunteers across the country were proud to help elect the strongest gun safety administration in history, and today's nomination shows the importance of that work. We look forward to supporting Judge Jackson's nomination and calling the Senate to swiftly confirm her. And then they have a number of other statements about, applauding the administration and yada, yada, yada. Here's another issue that this is why I think it's so important. We saw that Ketanji Brown Jackson is not willing to define the word woman. If she cannot define the word woman, how easy will it be for her to try to define the word or the term assault rifle or assault weapon, high capacity magazine? They're only using it. They're using a definition determined by research, determined by what? Something has to have a definition, and just like if you can't define woman, you cannot define gender disparity. If you can't define an assault weapon, how can you ban it? So assault weapons and high capacity magazines are exceptionally deadly. So this is their whole background here. High capacity magazines, commonly defined as ammunition magazines capable of holding more than 10 rounds, allow a shooter to fire more rounds without pausing to reload. The more rounds a shooter can fire consecutively, the more gunshot wounds they can inflict during an attack. This is very elementary school level logic that they use. Well, the more bullets you have, that's their logic. The more gunshots wounds you can inflict. Now, let me be clear here. Obviously, yes. If you're talking about a stationary target and no wind and you have perfect visibility, or obviously, the more tries you have, the best, the more chance you have of hitting the target more times. When you go to the carnival, right, when you have the little water gun and you're aiming at the clown in order to blow the balloon up and get the prize. So you're talking about a stationary target, and the more water that you would have, the easier it would be for you to blow up the balloon. And then the more time that you have, the easier it is, right? So all of those factors go in, the amount of ammunition and the amount of time for it to leave the weapon, but also the type of target that you're going after, which would ideally it would be a stationary target. Unfortunately, for people who are for murderers, why is it that so many murderers, so many attempted murders are unsuccessful? Or I should say, fortunately for those of us that are against murder, it's because most people are moving targets. Now, if you ambush somebody in their sleep, if you find somebody who is immobile on for whatever reason, yeah, it's much easier. But the logic that they're using is very it's very convoluted, and what they do is they specifically focus on mass shootings. And the reason that mass shootings, I believe, are such an obsession is because typically a mass shooter will seek out an area of high population where they simply don't care about being caught. That's why Sutherland Springs, which is listed here, that was a church. San Bernardino, I believe that was some sort of work setting. Parkland was a school. Newtown was also a school. Orlando, Florida was a nightclub. Las Vegas was a concert. Aurora was a movie theater. El Paso, I think, was some sort of outdoor fair. And Fort Hood was an army base. Now, they never really explain anything about. I think Fort Hood was even. Let me see here. I'm going to look on Wikipedia. So, the Fort Hood shooting itself was committed with an FN 57 pistol and a 357 Magnum revolver. So the 57 is, that's a pistol with, let me see here, capacity. So typically it's a 10 round capacity pistol that is, common in, you can buy it in the West, but it's not the most common pistol. It's Belgian. So in reality, what they're using here, for example, is a case in Fort Hood that didn't even involve an assault weapon. According to it's a handgun, right? So with a handgun on an army base, the assailant was able to kill 13 people and also wound 33. And he came out alive. And this was, at the time, ruled a workplace violence accident. So, and they specifically highlighted, okay, not only is it listed among the others, it says the 2009 Fort Hood, Texas shooter who shot and killed 13 people and injured 32 more specifically sought out high-capacity magazines in preparation for his attack. A witness to the shooter's purchase at a Killeen, Texas gun dealer reported he said he wanted the most technologically advanced weapon on the market and the one with the highest magazine capacity. Okay, so they're saying, well, he had high magazine capacity. Okay, well, be that as it may, did that make him shoot more accurately? Did that make his victims freeze in his path? That's not necessarily true, but they would have you believe that it is. Assault weapons led to 6 times as many people shot per mass shooting. That is a statistic that they're using in order to muddy the waters. Basically, this is what you need to know. Okay, they don't know how to define what an assault weapon is. Is it, for example, would an AK pistol count as an assault weapon? Would an AR pistol count as one? A sawed-off shotgun. There are a number of definitional issues that would arise that would sort of complicate what an assault weapon is. There are questions for some reason about a barrel shroud, right? The barrel shroud being basically what goes around the front area of the barrel before you get to the end of it. So basically that is largely for ergonomic purposes, so that instead of holding the barrel that when it's hot after you fire around, you're holding something that at least some of the heat dissipates. There's a lot of perforations in it so that the heat can sort of have a lot of heat sinks. So that's something that the the people who are gun control advocates, they see as some element that defines something as an assault weapon. So therefore, you may see, for example, there are illustrations about it. so, so they have to go assault weapons versus sporting weapons, and you see. This person says, this is a test I use on anyone who says we need to ban assault weapons. But hunting rifles are okay. Tell me what the functional difference is between these two firearms. So these two are functionally the same. And why? Because they're semi-automatic in operation. This may look like a shotgun, but it isn't. It's a hunting rifle. They fire the .308 Winchester cartridge. They're fed from detachable box magazine, right? So you see here, this is the magazine. This one is shown without it. And they're both, quote, black rifles, and they both have pistol grips. The black rifles part, I'm sure that he actually added as a joke, because the color doesn't matter, and you can actually have this in tan, you can have it in camo, you could have that in camo, you can have... So this whole exercise of defining an assault weapon is a vain exercise, because at the end of the day, in terms of function, it is the same. In terms of form and fit, it might be different, because ergonomically and in terms of day-to-day use, this might be much more comfortable for someone out in the woods, hunting for deer or something, whereas this might be more for somebody who is out doing some sort of tactical training. However, you actually could use this, the assault weapon at the bottom, for hunting, and you could use this to assault a person. They're not mutually exclusive. It's just one may be a little bit more comfortable than the other for the different functions. That is something that a judge like Ketanji Brown Jackson, with her ability to obfuscate and dissemble and say, well, I'm not a biologist, how am I supposed to define what a woman is? But yet at the same time, I can define something that is clearly a preventative measure as being punitive. It's something that puts her at a position where I think she's unfit to be on the bench. One final topic I want to cover is the passage of constitutional carry. So this was from WBNS TV. I think that they're out of, let's see here. So they are an Ohio channel, but they're not in my area. I think they're Okay, so they're Central Ohio, so maybe the Columbus area. They're basically responding to Ohio's new constitutional carry amendment that is going to affect in a couple months. Now, what does that mean? If you're a person who carries a concealed weapon today in Ohio, what you have to do first, before you do that, is go to a licensed instructor. Typically, these instructors are licensed through the NRA or through some other professional training group. Get your concealed carry education certificate. So it's 8 hours of gun safety education, including range time. So you get to go to the range and learn how to shoot and also learn the basics of gun safety and storage and maintenance. And then you would take an assessment test. You would get your certificate, take it to your local sheriff, and the sheriff does have the discretionary power, the sheriff or the deputy, the discretionary power to deny you your your concealed carry permit if the sheriff's office sees some sort of criminal issue in your background or some. I believe one of the famous examples is there was a man who had on his Facebook profile a lot of photos of himself smoking weed. So the sheriff in one of our counties denied him his concealed carry permit. He later got one from a different sheriff. So those are issues that have been already controversial because gun control groups in Ohio don't believe that you should have the ability to simply get a concealed carry license after taking 8 hours of education. They think that it's already too easy. Now that's going to be eliminated. You don't even need a permit. You will be in June allowed to go to a store, purchase a weapon, and concealed carry in Ohio without a permit. The reason that people might still try to get a permit, and I think it is a good idea, is because if you want to go, for example, to Kentucky, or you want to go to any other state in the union that has concealed carry reciprocity between their state and Ohio, that permit would entitle you to do that. Whereas if you were to go without the permit, they could put. I mean, your rights aren't protected there. Who are you kidding? So, I personally would still suggest that you take the course, and even if you are buying a weapon and you are, fully entitled to concealed carry without a permit, you probably should still take the course and try to get the permit, because why not? It's actually not very hard, and you get a lot of information that you might have not known before, even if you have been a gun owner. But here is the report about the constitutional carry law.
That was the call to action in 2019, not even 24 hours after a mass shooting in Dayton left 9 people dead. Ohio Governor Mike DeWine responded to that call with a 17-point plan to fight gun violence.
Fast forward to this week, and Governor DeWine has now signed a bill allowing people to carry concealed firearms without a permit. Thanks for joining us at 6. I'm Andrew Kinsey.
And I'm Brittany Bailey in for Yolanda tonight. Well, the governor is facing a lot of criticism for signing this most recent bill. We heard from him about that for the first time today.
About half the states now have this provision, and this is, I think, consistent with the United States Constitution.
That's the response from Governor Mike DeWine after he signed the controversial constitutional carry law this week. The law allows any legal gun owner to carry a weapon without a permit. The NRA praised the move, but many law enforcement organizations and Democrats have condemned it. The law also means if you get pulled over, you don't have to tell an officer if you have a gun.
Most police departments have told us that what they will do, that will simply become part of the protocol. That when a police officer walks up, there's always some questions that they are supposed to ask. If their department tells them to ask, that will be probably the first question that they'll ask.
This would be the second law Governor DeWine has signed in the past 2 years that has been praised by Second Amendment supporters. Just last year, he signed the Stand Your Ground law, which also drew a lot of criticism. This all comes nearly 3 years after this moment. Just a couple of months later, Governor DeWine rolled out the Strong Ohio bill, which quickly fizzled out in the legislature. We pressed him on that today.
What do you say to the people who have shouted for you to do something, and we've signed 2 different laws instead of that?
We're still asking the state legislature to take action on a bill, which I think is frankly a no-brainer, and that simply is, it says that violent repeat offenders who commit most of the violent crime today, if they are in possession of a gun, the judge should have the ability to put them away for at least 10 years.
That bill Governor DeWine mentioned there is House Bill 383. It was introduced last August and referred to committee in September. There has been no movement since then.
So let me outline really what's at stake here. Governor DeWine is running for re-election. He's facing not exactly the easiest time in the primary, the Republican primary. He has a well-connected opponent, Jim Renacci. He has a farmer also attacking him, Joe Blystone. He needs to shore up his support on the right, and he did it by supporting the constitutional carry law. Is that going to make me vote for Governor DeWine? No. I think he's a terrible governor. I think that he betrayed Ohioans' constitutional rights regarding restrictions and advisories during the COVID pandemic. And I just have to say, I think that as a governor, he's been largely a disappointment, although there's a few bright spots. The other issue I'd like to say is, I'd like to talk about is this one about whether assault rifles are really the problem. You can see here the percent of prisoners who was possessed a firearm in 2016. Of all prisoners, only 20.8% possessed a firearm. It's slightly higher at the state level than the federal level, but it's uniformly about 18.4% possessed a handgun. So almost like, I would say, 9 out of 10 of these people possessed a handgun. Okay? 1.5% possessed a rifle. Now, a rifle doesn't necessarily mean an assault rifle. It could just be a 22 hunting rifle, right? It could be, it could be any type of rifle conceivably, right? It could be a sniper rifle. A sniper rifle, by the way, is not an assault rifle. It doesn't have, and usually it would not have a high capacity magazine. A shotgun, 1.6%. So the rifle is the third category. And the other statistic I wanted to highlight was down here, which was the source for the prisoners who had used or possessed a weapon when they committed a crime. Only 7.5% at both levels had gotten it from a gun shop. 1.6% had gotten it from a pawn shop. 0.4% had gotten it from a flea market, and only 0.8% from the gun show. So that being said, a gun shop, it's actually pretty dumb to use a weapon that you've bought at a gun shop in a crime. Let me just tell you that you might as well just walk around with guilty stamped on your forehead. And that's all there is to it. Don't commit crimes with any weapon, but especially not with a weapon that you bought under your own name, which is the only way to buy one in a gun shop. I don't know about pawn shops personally. I think it's the same. It's the same procedure. Flea markets and gun shows. It's not across the board that you can just buy without identification. Basically, how it works is if you are at a gun show and you are a private vendor, right? You're not a federal firearms license owner. you are able to sell to somebody else as a private sale, right? And that is the only interpretation of the gun show loophole. Now, when you actually go to these shows, and you can go to, they have them every single weekend. You should go to one. It's kind of funny. There's a lot of characters there. Basically, the vast majority of the vendors are FFL holders. So, despite what you may think, the gun show loophole is a very, very small minority of guns actually sold at gun shows. It's only a select few of the vendors that appear there, and you don't know who those vendors are until you actually talk to them, right? Then you have another category, 25%, so a quarter of them, so more than double is obtained from an individual. So that may be bought from a family friend. Okay, now, why am I highlighting this area? A lot of people who are gun control advocates harp on this notion that it's the firearms industry that is motivating the NRA and politicians in order to loosen gun laws. This is one of the ways to disprove that in terms of crime, because, okay, when you buy from a family friend, the money has already been given to the manufacturer whenever that guy paid for the weapon. Okay, so the firearms company is not benefiting from the secondhand sale. It would be the same as if you commit a DUI in a secondhand Toyota. Is Toyota Corporation or the Toyota dealership that sold you the Corolla, are they to blame for the accident that you committed, the DUI? It shouldn't be hard to answer that question. It's not very hard. So then other ones are rented or borrowed from family or friend. That's just irresponsible owners. There's irresponsible vehicle owners. There's irresponsible microwave owners. There's irresponsible everything. Gift or purchased for the prisoners. So yeah, there are people. A good example would be the recent Michigan shooter whose family gifted him a weapon, which I think is ridiculous. So that's about 10% of all prisoners. Then you go further down the list, you got off the street and the underground market. That is the largest share, a plurality, 43.2%. So these are sales that are completely off of the, they're off the radar of the federal government, because it explains it here. Illegal sources of firearms that include markets for stolen goods, middlemen for stolen goods, criminals or criminal enterprises, or individuals or groups involved in sales of illegal guns. So this is the category that is driving the majority of these gun crimes, or not the majority, but the highest percentage is from this category. And then of course you have theft, whether it's from burglary, from a retail source, from a family or friend, unspecified. And then you have other locations, other sources. So these are areas where the gun control community, they've been spouting the same narrative for so many years, and they're using those narratives in order to say to people who don't know any better that the person who is buying weapons and using them for their own protection is a menace to you. Whereas in reality, a lot of these crimes are being committed by people who legally don't have the right to hold that weapon. There was just this week a shooting in a park very close to where we live, a park that I actually walk through every week. And it was an unfortunate incident. Actually, fortunately, the child who was shot survived. But of course, that's small consolation when, this was something that happened in a recreational area. It's actually close to a lot of family dwellings and public buildings and everything. And that is why I'm telling you that, you know, when you have teens that are able to obtain these weapons, you have to remember they cannot legally purchase the weapon. It is the person to blame is the person that allowed the weapon to get into their hands, and it's almost 100% a certainty that they did not obtain it from any of the legal venues, such as a gun shop, pawn shop, flea market, or gun show. And it's also illegal to be a straw buyer, by the way. So if I was to go to a shop and try to purchase a weapon on behalf of someone else, that would be an illegal act. And both I and the other person would be eligible to be prosecuted. So the long and the short of it today, okay, this has been a long discourse. We're living in a reality right now where there's not much to hold on to in terms of hope. I don't think that political parties can deliver the solution. I don't think that politicians can deliver the solution. I don't think the police. I don't think that the media. I don't think that entertainment industry. I don't think that the courts can deliver the solution. You have to be the solution, and you have to. The beginning of that solution is to do your own research. Compare what's being told to you to, data that you can find for yourself. This was data that I found on a forum that a friend of mine supplied, and it actually is the special report, Source and Use of Firearms Involved in Crimes, from the Department of Justice in 2019. So always try to use the best available data. Obviously, anybody can dispute a source, but you can always say to them, well, what evidence do you have? And this is basically how you win over people that are sort of on the fence or are ignorant or have never really thought about the issue, have a very superficial view of it. Unfortunately, we're in a very difficult time in general. Economically, we have civil liberties being eroded, and I hope that you're doing your best to prepare for any of the uncertainty ahead. I do hope that this Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson does not become a justice, that she remains a federal judge, if at all. Honestly, I don't think she belongs on the bench, period, because I don't think that this type of judicial philosophy belongs on the bench. But yeah, I think that based on her behavior, I don't want her to be involved in any sort of cases such as gun safety, abortion. You can talk about redistricting. She apparently has committed to recusing herself from any affirmative action cases. So these are all issues where, or maybe it's just the one concerning Harvard because it's her alma mater. But these are all issues that I think are going to be major hazards for us going forward if she takes the bench. And the reason for that is because not only does she have a say in cases that are heard before the Supreme Court, but in some cases, because she's assigned a district, she gets to decide some of the cases that are actually brought before the court. So you could be screwed because she could say that an important case such as the Bake the Cake case, remember Jack Phillips of Masterpiece Cake, who didn't want to bake a cake for a gay wedding, he would be shit out of luck because this judge could say, well, this really isn't important to me. So please like, share, and subscribe. I do want to plug my other channels. You can find me on Odyssey, Bold Like a Leopard, Rumble, Chef Leopard, BitChute, Chef Leopard, YouTube, Bold Like a Leopard, Podbean, Razor Sharp News Chronicle, Gab at Starscream85Minds.com, Chef Leopard, Substack, that's razorsharpnews.substack.com, Telegram, okay, Razor Sharp News Chronicle, and Getter. You can find me at Razor Ray McCoy. I know it's a little confusing with all these different screen names, but Just try them all. And have a great night.